And it really is a pleasure for us to host Amana Fontanella-Khan tonight. She'll be talking about her new book, Pink Sari Revolution, A Tale of Women and Power in India. She's a journalist by background. Okay, so rumor has it that you spent some time in Bollywood, but you can either confirm, deny, or say no comment, which here in Washington, people can interpret any way they want. She's a contributor to Slate, The Daily Beast, The New York Times, and the Christian Science Monitor. While living in India for 4 years, she spent considerable time in Uttar Pradash, home base of the Pink Sari Revolution, where she did much of the reporting and research for this book. Now, we're really excited about this book here at P&P, and I truly believe this is an important book, especially in the United States and many parts of the West. We often only see India as sort of a place of polarities, especially when it comes to women. We all know about Indira Gandhi, one of the first women prime ministers around the world. But of course, we also sort of have this concept of dowries and bride burnings. And of course, last year's gang rape of the young woman student in New Delhi being an example. We hear about sexual crimes against women that seem to be all too common and too often forgiven. What we hear less about are incidences that really have occurred throughout much of India's history of courageous men and women, including many who are poor and rural and uneducated, who have found ways to seek, that have sought ways to correct rights and to right wrongs and to bridge the gaps of inequality and injustice. Pink Sari Revolution focuses on one such story, that of an unlikely and extraordinary woman, Sampat Pal. I probably am not pronouncing her name right, so I'm sorry if I'm not. And the vigilante women's movement she founded in India's largest state. But I think what I like about this book is, in addition to just the way the story is told and the importance of this particular story, is that for me it was a much bigger and broader story, one that transcends borders and oceans and nations. It's really a story of how those with the least power, those assigned to the lowest rung on society's ladder, can join together and, with a few ounces of outrage and a lot of determination, demand justice and make change through collective action. And I have to say that reading this book made me wonder how many Sampat Pals are out there, perhaps simply unrecognized, not just in India, but around the world. I suspect, and I certainly hope, there are many more that we just don't know about. But for now, we can thank Amana for bringing recognition to the Pink Sari movement and to the possibilities it represents for others, for telling the story so effectively and so engagingly, and especially for giving voice to women on the lowest rung of society's ladder. So please join me in welcoming Amana to Politics and Growth.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. I understand that there's a big game on this evening, so I really appreciate that you made it here. I'm going to be timing myself so I don't go on for too long. I want to start just by, saying that this sort of my book has come out at a time when our attentions have been drawn to the sort of violence against women in India. There seems to be, one gang rape after another. And I hope that it's able to add to the conversation and is able to balance this idea that, India is only a sort of a country of victimized women who are, sort of suffering and upon whom fate has kind of inflicted great sorrows. I hope that it offers a message of sort of agency and of women, even in the most difficult and challenging of situations, to stand up and take control of their lives. So in the next 20 minutes, will just briefly explain what the gang is, where they've emerged, why they emerged, who's behind them, and then we can sort of start a Q&A session. Just to start out with, I want to ask, how many of you have heard of the gang before? Okay, that's great. So hopefully it'll be interesting for you and also those of you for whom this is a new subject. So the Pink Gang was started, the Pink Gang, or the Gulabi Gang as they're known in Hindi, was started in 2006. They are based in the North Indian state of Uttar Pradash, which is where the Taj Mahal is located. They are named after their pink sari uniforms and their pink sticks. And they have gained notoriety for taking on men who abuse their wives, as well as taking on corrupt politicians and crooked police. So as I said, they emerged in this state called Uttar Pradesh, and I just want to take a minute to talk about this place because it's apart from being associated with the Taj Mahal, which is very beautiful, in India, it has an entirely different kind of association. It is the most populous state in the country. It's got just under 200 million people living there. So it's basically got the same population as Brazil. If it were an independent country, it would be one of the most populous countries in the world. But it's also the least developed. It's the poorest. It's got development levels akin to sub-Saharan Africa. And the central government has described Uttar Pradesh as lawless. And the Uttar Pradesh police force, which prides itself on being the largest police force in the world under a single command, has been described by a high court judge as being the largest criminal organization in the world. So it really is a challenging place to live. And the region in Uttar Pradesh where the Pink Gang was sort of formed is Bundelkhand, which in this very, very challenging, sort of dangerous state is probably the worst neck of the woods to be in. It's for a long time was plagued with bandits. And so it's really important to understand that this is the context in which the Pink Gang has emerged. The Pink Gang was founded by a woman called Sampat Pal. She was married off at the age of 12. She then had the first of her 5 children at 15. Sampat was sort of born into a peasant family. I mean, she was working the fields. This was a very sort of rural kind of upbringing that she had. And she exhibited signs of kind of leadership at a very, very young age. She organized her first protest at the age of 8. And I'll tell you a little bit about the protest in a moment. But it's from a very, very young age, she realized that she was sort of slightly different from everyone else. I think she kind of sees herself as sort of set apart from others. And I just want to read to you just a few paragraphs that kind of capture this element of her. So here we go. So just who do you think you are is a question that Sampat is used to hearing. At times, she acts like she's running a small detective agency. On other occasions, she behaves like a police officer patrolling Bundelkhand. For all of her life, Sampat's endless meddling has nettled many of those around her and left others slightly baffled. Sampat does not know exactly why she has persistently felt compelled to get involved in other people's business. Indeed, it represents one of the greatest mysteries that she has encountered in her life. She once declared that not even I understand Sampat Pal. She paused and then, wrinkling her brow as she pondered the enigma that she represented to herself, came up with an idea. When I die, the Indian government should look in my brain and find out how I have become like this. It was an earnest, if somewhat humorous suggestion. After a moment, she added, they should look into my heart too. That could help. So why does she think she's this sort of person who's been endowed with these special gifts? I think that part of that can be answered with a story that I'm going to tell you. So this is the story of her very first protest at the age of 8. And it really gets to the core of who Sampat is. So as I mentioned, Sampat grew up in this very feudal sort of village, and the village was dominated by a sort of powerful land-owning family that owned sort of most of the land in this village. And one of Sampat's little friends, who was a shepherd boy called Chandpal, went to the bathroom. He relieved himself on the field belonging to the landlord. And the daughter of the landlord, a girl called Gayatri, spotted him, and she went over, she shouted at him, and then she gave him a big slap, sort of telling him, don't you ever do this again, and just had a big sort of telling off at him. And the poor boy was obviously crying. It was really upsetting, and it became a bit of an incident in the village. And Sampat's father got involved. He complained to Gayatri's father and said, this is not acceptable, your daughter can't go around beating children, it's not fair. And the landlord responded by forbidding Sampat's family from walking on their land, which was just, meant that they couldn't really go about their business given that the family owned most of the land. So what Sampat did was she organized what can be best described as a poop protest. She got all of her friends the next day to go. She marched them down to the field right in front of Gayatri's house, and there they were, and they all whipped down their trousers and they squatted and they went to the toilets on the field in this provocative act, and they were spotted obviously by Gayatri as they were there. And Gayatri came over, she was brandishing a stick, and she said, "I'm going to beat you, just you wait, I'm coming." And Sampat said, "No, just you wait, I'm gonna show you." And so when Gayatri arrives, Sampat seizes her, pins her to the soiled ground, and kind of rubs her actually in the excrement. It got very, very messy and awful. But this is kind of where Sampat really started. I mean, it just kind of went on from there. And the basic premise that with which Sampat has always operated with all of her protests is that if your opponent is more powerful than you, then you need to counter that by just with numbers. You need to compensate by just having more people on your side. And so, in the case of Gayatri, Sampat got her friends along. She didn't go on her own to the field. And as her opponents grew bigger and more important, Sampat's gang and her group of women just grew as well. And now they're estimated to have 20,000 members on their side. So that's kind of the early years. Obviously, when Sampat was married off at 12, her in-laws didn't know what they were getting themselves into. There was a lot of confrontations. They, like many in-laws in this kind of a situation, were kind of expecting to have an extra pair of hands in the house, sort of a servant essentially, because most women in the kind of village where Sampat is living were little more than servants. Sampat was kind of charged with going to grind the grains and collect the water from the well and carry it back. She had to do all these very arduous, physically demanding tasks for a 12-year-old are exhausting. And very early on, she realized that this is what her life was going to be, just being a servant and producing babies and cooking. And she refused. She protested. She said, "I'm not going to do this." And her parents-in-law just didn't know. They were at wit's end of what to do with this girl. And at the age of 15, she then convinced her husband, who was this older man, who's a widow, who's sort of 10 years her senior, convinced him to move out of the house. He's very meek kind of man compared to Sampat, and so he just kind of agreed. She's very persuasive. So they move, and this is very unusual in this kind of context to leave your in-laws' house. It's very common to live with your extended families. You pool your monies together, and it's just But so she moves, and from that point on, she was just always getting more and more sort of independence, always sort of wanting more freedoms. The big break for her came when she taught herself how to sew. She was the first woman in her village to acquire this skill. And what it did was it empowered her financially. She started out earning her husband because she was giving sewing lessons, and also she was a seamstress. But the sewing lessons were really were more than just what sort of met the eye. It was really her very consciously imparting a skill to other young women that would help them to become independent. And during these lessons, when all the women were gathered together, she would kind of give them all these sort of like speeches, tell them, talk to them about about women's rights, and that they shouldn't, bow down to their husbands, and that they shouldn't like let themselves be oppressed. And so that was her kind of agenda. And what happened was she was spotted. She was scouted by a local NGO that was looking for these kind of self-starting women who were, for savvy. And so they sort of invited her into the organization. That's how she started working, formally as an NGO worker. And so she did that for a long time. And then just a year or two before starting the gang, she organized what are called self-help groups. So self-help groups are, this was an idea that was come up, that the Indian government came up with in the early 2000s to help lift millions of rural families out of poverty. The idea was to kind of create these sort of lending circles where poor village women would, in groups of like 10 or 12, pool together small amounts of money every month. And then when they've hit a certain target, they're eligible for government loans. And Sampat was organizing these circles. So she would go from village to village, and she would sort of call out all of the women from their huts, bring them to like the square and tell them, okay, this is important. Most of these women had never before handled their household finances. So she would convince them to get involved. And then over time, these women sort of saw that Sampat was really powerful, someone that they could turn to for help. So many of the women would come to Sampat with problems that they were facing. There would be all these stories of abusive husbands, or just, government officials who are not giving them their government grains or their pensions, or, and so Sampat said to them, look, we have to address this collectively. We have to go as a group and make demands on the local officials. And they did that. She would get all her women from the self-help group and march them to the local government official. But the response was always the same. They said, well, who are you? Who do you think you are? Why do you need to listen to you? And they would just send them, shoo them away. And so Sampat realized that they needed to have an answer to that question. Like, who are you? And that answer is, that question is answered by this sort of powerful, this uniform, which is a powerful kind of, a reflection of a collective identity. And so they organized their first protest, which was for a road which was basically in terrible condition in the town of Attara, which is where most of these women were based. They wore these pink saris, and then they went and they had these sticks, and they blocked all the traffic, and they started working the road, because it was all muddy and rocky, and they started saying, well, this is not a road, it's let's just use it as a field, we might as well grow vegetables here, it'll be better for everyone if we just put it to use. And so all the traffic was kind of amassing, and people didn't know what was going on, and these women were doing this bizarre funny protest. And so eventually the district magistrate came down, and all the media came down, and the district magistrate, who's in charge of the roads, had to agree on the spot in front of everyone who was there that he would build the road and he was going to address it. And he did. And that day, the local media christened the organization the Gulabi Gang, which is the Pink Gang. And it kind of just went on from there. So that's kind of, just a brief introduction to the organization. There's so much more to say. I just quickly want to explain that in the book, there's a case that I look at that kind of, is sort of forms the sort of main, the sort of the story that through which I look at the Pink Gang. And it takes place between December 2011 and January 2012. And it's probably the most important, challenging case that the Pink Gang has ever fought. It involved a young, sort of teenage, lower caste girl who was raped by a politician. And he kept her in his house for several days, and when she managed to escape, he caught her and brought her to the police station and accused her of theft, and she was locked up. And so my book looks at how the Pink Gang sort of gets her freed from jail and gets the politician locked up. And but we'll have plenty of time to talk about that and everything else. So thank you, and feel free to ask any questions you might have.
You mentioned before that most women in Sampat's village did not know how to sew. Here sewing is usually considered to be a more feminine pursuit. I can't help but wonder if this was considered something that men did, if men were traditionally tailors, or if the art of sewing had just gone out. And on a related subject, I was wondering if the Pink Gang and Sampat have ever gotten involved in empowering women to move into occupations that they weren't able to participate in before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. Yes, it really struck me that they didn't know how to sew. I mean, you'd think that in small villages, handcrafts and, these sort of skills would be, a sort of common sort of for everyone, that you'd expect most women to know how to do this, but it was not the case. And I think that part of the reason was that the women in the village, the kind of villages where Sampat was living, were just working on fields most of the time. They were, there were farm hands, and the few tailors that existed in these villages were men. Every time I've gone to a tailor in India, it's always a male tailor. I've never seen a female tailor. So it's Yeah, it's unusual, and so to answer your second question, definitely that was part of Sampat's plan. This is an obvious skill. This is something that is very easy for women to attain, to learn how to do. It's something that they can do within the household, and it's something that they can do with female clients. They don't even have to come into interaction with men if they don't want to, and if their husbands don't want them to. And so definitely, she very consciously, was teaching women how to sew with the idea that they would, have an income and become financially independent.
So now there are female tailors in India.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they're not very, they're not very visible. So if if you're like on a high street and you're looking for a tailor, you'll only find like a male tailor. But the women tend to work at home, so you would, if you ask around, you'd find one.
I wanted to know how you came across this story and what was it that drew you to going and spending time, and what was your heart connection with this story?
Mm-hmm. So I was living in India between 2008 and 2012. And when I heard about the organization, I had just started out my freelance career, and I was, desperately, I was hunting for good stories. And a friend of mine had met with Sampat and came back just enthused about the organization, and just, came back with stories that seemed incredible. I mean, I had never heard of an organization like this. So that's what kind of drew me in initially. I think ultimately the reason why I spent essentially 2 years of my life like working on this subject was, when you're in India, there's a huge gap between the have and the have-nots, and it's something that is very difficult to kind of deal with when you're there, when you're sort of relatively privileged expat, and like many people in my situation, I would try to place myself in the shoes of others. I would try to imagine, well, what would it have been like for me if I would have been born in a slum, or if I would have been born in a small village in the middle of India, and that question always unsettled me, because I kind of just thought, well, my life would have been terrible. That was like my initial thought, but actually it's not the case. That kind of view that entire, like, millions of people just live miserable lives, that they're like, just, they have no agency, that they're just kind of subjected to their context, to their situation, and they are enslaved by it, is a very ungenerous one. And it's also, it's just not accurate. Women and men from even the most difficult, challenging situations can create incredible lives for themselves. And that, that was fundamentally what really drew me to these women, that it was just a sort of a real message of hope that it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, you can live an amazing life that matters, and that is inspirational and powerful.
Yeah, well, thank you for this interesting book. I have two questions. The first question deals with much more national politics in India. I was wondering, are there in Congress, in the government, are there leading women politicians pushing the issue of women in academia, et cetera, et cetera? I'm sure there have to be people pushing these issues and talking about the fact that a developing country is going to remain developing if it doesn't do something to lift up its women and educate its women and stuff like that. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that against, the issues that have been going on lately. The second question, I think is somewhat more important, but is the issue of you having lived in the West, obviously, with feminism, et cetera, to compare and contrast, in essence, notions of feminism in the West, right? Mm-hmm. Against what these women are fighting for indigenously and locally in their communities, and to maybe make a little bit of comparison and contrast of how, African American women have the same kind of argument with white American women, et cetera. In Europe, different minority women, Muslims, have different these arguments. Where I grew up in the Netherlands with, white Dutch women and stuff like that. So maybe you want to talk about that and give a sense of how they are trying to do their life, and we're still remaining within certain contexts and stuff like that, and all the stresses that come out of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So about the first question, the Congress Party, it's interesting. For those of you who don't know the Congress Party, it's the kind of independence era party of India, and it is has been in power for most of Indian sort of post-independence history. And the party is led by Sonia Gandhi, who's the matriarch of the Gandhi dynasty. And interestingly, actually, Sampat has been approached by the Congress Party to run as a candidate with the party. She ran in the last elections in the Uttar Pradash Assembly with the Congress Party. And I'm afraid it doesn't have that much to do with Congress Party's commitment to women's rights as much as their interest in, gaining a slice of the electoral pie in Uttar Pradesh, which is the largest of all of the states just because of its population. And the Congress Party hasn't done too well there in the past few decades. I think it's been very disappointing for a lot of women that the few powerful female politicians that exist in India haven't really taken up women's rights. So Sonia Gandhi is considered the Forbes, most powerful list, names her up there. She's in the top 20. She's essentially the leader of the biggest democracy in the world. But, she would have the power to do something about this, but it hasn't happened. In the state of Uttar Pradesh, there was the chief minister, Mayawati, who was a lower caste woman in power, and you think this is ideal. Not only is she a woman, but she's from the most oppressed kind of part of society, and yet she had a devastating impact on women's rights. Rape and violence against women spiked under her administration, and so I personally am of the opinion that identity politics doesn't really work. It's not like in India you realize that people of a certain background, whether it's sort of, women or people from certain castes, they don't often fight for the rights of those, people of their sort of same background. They kind of have other interests that sort of get in the way of that. So that's one point. About women, feminists in the West compared to the Pink Gang, there's a huge difference. It's actually really fascinating. So, for example, divorce. I think a lot of women in the West would recommend that if a woman is being beaten day by day, is going through horrific domestic violence, that it is better for that woman to leave her husband and to have a life separate from him. But the Pink Gang almost never recommends divorce because, and part of it is just because of the context. They understand that for a woman who's divorced, she just becomes fair game. I mean, she's a lot more protected being married to a domestic abuser than being, living independently, because that just makes her vulnerable to, huge levels of attack. So I think the Pink Gang is they're very practical about certain subjects that, in a way that might be surprising. When it comes to abortion, for example, for Indian feminists, they have a very complicated relationship to abortion because it's associated with sex-selective abortions. Millions of female fetuses have been aborted in India. Because the female children are just they're seen as undesirable and they're seen as a financial burden. And so, again, this is not a cause that you'll see, women like the Pink Gang, rallying behind. So definitely there's not a kind of global feminist kind of alliance that I see happening anytime soon, not at least with the Pink Gang.
How can people in the United States help support or best support this movement? And then also, do you think that these issues are somehow more troubling in Uttar Pradesh, or is this a larger issue throughout India as well? So just those two questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that So the Pink Gang is doing, a really good job just managing their operations at a very, very local level. So I don't think that there's much space for kind of people from the outside to kind of get involved in sort of the sort of day-to-day operations or the kind of the running of the organization. This is not a group that kind of has a lot of volunteers that come in and kind of spend time with them. In fact, the Pink Gang often they're often approached by local Indian very sort of NGOs to kind of partner with them, and on the whole it's just not worked out, mostly for logistical reasons, because they're really in an isolated sort of far-flung part of the country, and they also have a very kind of unique style of doing things, and they just kind of, on the whole, just kind of go about doing things on their own. But I think in terms of how to help, I think the best way really is just to raise awareness about the fact that these these crimes happen, that why it's the Pink Gang emerging. It's because of the law and order situation in Uttar Pradesh, the severity of violence against women in Uttar Pradesh. And so, I think that if this were to dominate the kind of public discourse the way that it has been after the Delhi gang rape and all the subsequent rapes, that kind of public discussion can help put pressure on the government to address these issues. And it can also inspire other organizations to maybe, to emerge. So I think, awareness raising, as kind of intangible as that sounds, is actually very powerful. To address your question about Uttar Pradesh, it's definitely, it's very difficult as a woman living there. And I think that although, violence against women is a problem that exists across the various states of India, I think it's particularly pronounced in this part of the country. First of all, just because of the law and order situation, the fact that it's really poorly governed, the fact that the police are just entrenched with sort of corruption and criminality, that has exacerbated the kind of pre-existing sort of sexism and misogyny that is prevalent in the state. Then you also have the fact that because it's overwhelmingly rural. This means that, first of all, women have very few kind of opportunities to get out of their situation. It's not like in Delhi or Mumbai. There's a huge amount of social mobility that's happening. Women are becoming educated. They're entering into the workforce, and this has a kind of empowering sort of effect on women. But this dynamic does not happen in places like Uttar Pradesh because these jobs just don't exist. So and a lot of the husbands of women in Uttar Pradesh migrate to Mumbai and Delhi, where they work as laborers, but they don't bring their wives with them. So the men are they're entering into, on some occasions, a 21st century economy. They're gaining the fruits of the sort of economic growth, but the women they're not. They're really living in a completely different era almost. So no, it's definitely, whenever I would travel from Mumbai or Delhi to Uttar Pradesh, it's night and day. So, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to tell you I really enjoyed reading your book, and one of the things that I thought was interesting was the fact that Sampat Pal's older 3 daughters were married off at a fairly young age, and you talked about this in your book, and I found it interesting that she was, very strong in opposing a lot of the issues that women are facing, but when it came to her own children, she kind of acquiesced to, I think you mentioned in the book, pressure from her in-laws and societal norms in the upbringing of her children. And so I was wondering if she talked to you more about that when you were, living with her and doing the research.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this is a very painful part of Sampat's life. And she didn't talk about it very easily. It was I spent 2 years, getting to know her and establishing trust. And also I lived at her house on 2 occasions. So I really got to know her and her family very well. And so she really kind of opened up over the course of that period. But even still, she kept on offering these various different accounts of what happened. Sometimes she will just flat out deny that her daughters were married off before 18. She just, I think, she's in denial about it in some moments. Then in other moments, she'll defend herself and say, look, I had no choice. I was living with my in-laws. She was not living with her in-laws, but she's living in the village where they were, and they were pressuring her to marry off the daughters. And I think what's important to understand is child marriage often happens. The logic, one of the reasons for it is that it's so dangerous for women that they're safer if they get married off younger. Because if they're not married, they're vulnerable to attack. And so this kind of logic is very deceiving. Because you think you're protecting women, but you're obviously not. So she was pressured a lot to marry off her daughters, and it was only when Sampat and her family left their in-laws' village and moved to a different town that her eldest daughter was able to, go finish high school, go to college, and she's married, but she's an adult, and it's an entirely different story. She, will probably go on to work either as a teacher or, she's got like career plans in mind, and she's equipped to sort of be financially independent, and her sort of life is just so different from her sisters, who are at home most of the day. They're looking after a lot of children. They spend most of the day cooking for large numbers of people, and they also physically, because they bore children at such a young age, they've aged very, very quickly. It's really like worn them down. So yes, I mean, it's really one of the most sensitive topics to talk to Sampat about, because it's probably one of the biggest failures of her life, the fact that she's been able to help so many other women, but her own daughter is, just face the very same pain that she had. And it's when she gave birth to a daughter, it was her first child was a daughter, and her and this is why she left her parents-in-law house. This was at 15. Her mother-in-law was furious at her, and they kept on taunting her, saying, "You gave birth to a daughter. Like, you're useless. Look how terrible that you gave us a daughter. This is, and just bemoaning the fact." And Sampat said, "I'm happy that I have a daughter," and she was really pleased. And from the time of birth, she dreamt of the life that her daughter would have, and really hoped that she would not go through the same pain that she had, hoped that she wouldn't have a child marriage. And obviously the fact that happened was very painful. So yes.
I have a question that may seem peripheral, but I wonder about the role of religion in many societies with especially monotheistic religions. Religion hasn't always played the most positive role, and as far as the role of women are concerned. How does that work in India?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And arguably, religious leaders have played a sort of controversial role in furthering the sort of violence against women and kind of legitimizing it. There was recently this case of a sort of a Hindu saint / sort of godman called Asiram Bapu, who just shortly after the Delhi gang rape came out with an incredibly insensitive remark. He said, if only the woman, the gang rape victim, would have gone to her rapists just before the attack and would have said a prayer to a deity, and if she would have tied a rakhi on his wrist. A rakhi is a kind of thread that you tie around your brother's wrists, and you become brother and sister. And the idea is if only you would have tied a rakhi and said, "I'm your sister, don't do anything to me," that it never would have happened. Like, this is what he was recommending girls do in these situations. And the fact that somehow she had not responded well to the threat of rape was incredibly inflammatory, incredibly insensitive comment. And just the other week, this very same man was accused of sexually assaulting a minor who was brought to his ashram for spiritual healing and and for help. He preyed on a very vulnerable young woman. And so and there's other cases of similar sort of figures, these sort of Hindu mystics or godmen who make these kind of comments. So I think that there's many Indians who are very disappointed with religious figures. Also, as you may have heard, that the trial of the Delhi gang rape is ongoing, and that we're expecting a verdict tomorrow. And just the other day, when the verdict of the juvenile was announced, there was a protest that was organized by sort of women's rights groups who felt that the verdict was, the jail term was just too short, and they were outnumbered by another protest happening just next to them of supporters of this Astiram Bapu who said that his name was being maligned, that these attacks were unfair, that this man never would do something like this, and anyone who is suggesting otherwise is a liar. And they were chased away. The protesters who were there for the Delhi gang rape were chased away by these people, and as I said, outnumbered by them. So unfortunately, there's still a lot of there's a lot of people who close an eye to very obvious, instances of sexual abuse when it comes to religious figures.
I'd like to go back to what you were just talking about, the connection between gender-based violence and the systemic inhibitions to really pursue perpetrators. And I wonder how much of the gender-based violence is often absorbed by the women. I'm more familiar with Nepal, where the laws are, let us make any law, it doesn't make any difference. For example, with all the child marriages, what has happened in huge numbers is that there was a mortality rate for the birth rates for these young girls who were forced to marry at early ages. The rates were enormously high, and it was the number one rate, the number one cause of death for young women from something like 12 to 28. And it has now been surpassed by suicides in that age range because there has been no support from any governmental level and no protection. They've changed the law that now you cannot marry under age 20, which is so ludicrous, because what do you want? You want for us to have a law at age 50? It's okay. It does, we'll do anything. But there is no enforcement, and what systemic support can come in for women in these countries where the patriarchy controls women's bodies as property and all political power, all economic power.
Thank you for your question. There are systemic obstacles to attaining justice as a survivor of sexual assault. One of the main problems is the police. Is when you go into a police station. First of all, many women don't want to go into a police station because it's quite a dangerous place to go as a woman. Which is why one of the oversubscribed services, most subscribed services of the Pink Gang, is just bringing you in, accompanying you into the station, because it's seen as a place that's dangerous, and there have been assaults and rapes and murders that have happened in police stations. So if you survive that, if that doesn't happen to you, then there's a series of other kind of challenges. First of all, the policemen are overwhelmingly male, and they're overwhelmingly unsympathetic and outright hostile to sexual assault victims. I was reading, there's a big kind of sting operation that was done by an investigative magazine called Tehelka back in 2012. And what they did was they went into police stations in New Delhi, so this is the nation's capital, and they secretly recorded conversations with police sort of station house officers there, who are the first responders. These are the people that women are going to speak to when they've been raped. And something like half of these police officers said that basically the majority, like one police officer said 99% of rape cases are fake, that women, and then he rattles off a whole number of reasons why a woman might say that she's raped when she wasn't. She was a prostitute who didn't get paid, and so she's just or there's like women who are poor who just want to maybe get money out of their assaulters, and this is why they're coming up with these claims. And sometimes even if it's very evident that a rape has happened, it's undeniably physically that it's taken place, they will say that, you know, that the woman was at fault, that she was, you know, kind of, that she had led the men on. So when you have the police who are so, you know, just not trained, I think it's really a level of, it's a matter of training, of sensitization, and also, you know, having more female officers in these stations. These are the kind of reforms that can help address these challenges that women face when they're going to meet with the police. But it hasn't. The reforms haven't really. They've not been pushed through yet, even after the Delhi gang rape, and even though there's been a sort of a new anti-rape bill. It's still. I think if you were to walk into a police station today reporting a rape, they might even try to convince you to marry your rapist, you know, to settle, to compromise. This happens all the time. So when you have this kind of mindset, it can only be changed with a really committed government effort to sort of like put forward a nationwide sensitization and awareness campaign, and really to retrain all of these officers across the country. And that's a big task at hand. And I don't think at the moment the government is really, you know, committed. They want just quick fix solutions, but they're not willing to really like roll their sleeves up and make significant changes.
Thank you.